Welcome back to Harbor. Well, it's getting nasty out there. Chris Christie pounds away at a heckler. Ted Cruz says a Jeb Bush candidacy will mean a Republican defeat in 2016. Rand Paul says the Republican brand itself sucks, like bad pizza crust. Oh, yes, and Ralph Nader slams Hillary Clinton as a menace to the country. Well, that's pretty strong. Who's right and who's wrong in these fights? The roundtable tonight. Joe Madison hosts the Madison Show on Sirius XM's Urban View Network. Liz Mayer is a former online communications director for the Republican National Committee. And Manu Raju is senior congressional reporter for Politico. As we showed you earlier on CNBC today, Ted Cruz was asked if Jeb Bush was too moderate to run for the White House. Let's watch.
Jeb has not declared his candidacy. I like Jeb. I'm a fan of Jeb Bush's. I'm going to let him decide if he's running first and let the primary voters make a decision. But I will say this. We need to learn from history. We need to look to history and what works and what doesn't. And the one thing is clear is that if Republicans run another candidate in the mold of a Bob Dole or a John McCain or a Mitt Romney, and let me be clear, all three of those are good, honorable men. They're decent men. They're patriots. But if we run another candidate in the mold of a Bob Dole or John McCain or Mitt Romney, we will end up with the same result, which is millions of people will stay home on Election Day, which is what happened for all three of them. And if we run another candidate like that, Hillary Clinton will be the next president.
You know, Liz, way back in 1952, that's the speech that Everett Dirksen made before Dwight Eisenhower was nominated and went on to two big victories. So I don't know whether it's right or not. I've looked at the pattern of your party, and you've ran some center-right candidates with some effect. Nixon, of course, Reagan became more centrist as he ran in his presentation, certainly, and certainly W winning and George Bush Sr. winning. The moderates don't always lose. What do you think? What do you make of Ted Cruz's motive for saying something like that?
I think Ted Cruz, his motive is that he wants to fire up the base and tell them something that they very much like to hear, and something that is going to inspire them to donate money to his political committee, but which frankly is not actually substantiated when you go out and you look at the data. The reality is that the reason that John McCain lost and the reason that Mitt Romney lost is not because they were moderate. There are very specific reasons why McCain lost that were really to do with the direction that people felt the country was going in months and months and months before we ever got even really into 2008. And as far as Romney is concerned, you know, the reality is Romney didn't lose because he was moderate. He lost because he was a terrible candidate, just an absolutely terrible candidate. And yeah, he was a bit too moderate for my taste on certain economic policy topics. But the reason that people didn't want to vote for him wasn't fundamentally because of that. It was a whole host of other things. And so I think Ted Cruz, when he says that's one thing that's certain, he's actually completely incorrect about that. That's one thing that's not certain.
Joe Madison, looking across the aisle, I think it's fair to say you are looking across the aisle. Who do you fear most as a challenger to the Democratic nominee, whether it's Hillary or not? Would it be somebody center right or somebody hard right?
Oh, you would fear someone who is center right. The extremes never win. They don't win if they're hard left. They don't win if they're hard right. Now, they may campaign, and we all know this, in the primaries, because they're going after a certain part of the base to make sure that they, especially if there are 4 or 5 candidates, Chris, they've got to win. But the reality is, when it comes to that general election, we see it in the debate, we see it in the appearance, they all move right back to the center. Everybody has done that because it is the center that tends to govern, and it's the center that wins elections. And so, Ted Cruz, I agree with the Republican to my left here. It's just a way to try to rally the base early.
Okay, let's talk about the other side, because there is sort of a both sides doing this thing. Good for the goose, good for the gander. Yeah. Ralph Nader had some very strong words the other day about Hillary Clinton when he was asked about her. He warned Democrats not to, his word, coronate her in 2016. Here's Ralph.
Well, Hillary is a corporatist and a militarist. Do we want another corporatist and militarist? She thinks Obama is too weak. He doesn't kill enough people overseas. So she's a menace to the United States of America.
Manu Raju, sir, take over here for Ralph Nader, because I know every progressive I know is still mad at him over Florida. But that's
right, that's right.
I have another theory about him, which is he pulled Al Gore over to the left on the corporate issues and exposed a lot of the middle to W. And that's how W got close enough to grab it in the Supreme Court. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, Ralph Nader certainly represents a very a minority on the left, but still, if he speaks to really the populist economic message that folks on the left feel like that not only Obama has missed during his time in office, but also Hillary and the Clintons. They don't rail against the big banks the way that Elizabeth Warren does, or the way that Bernie Sanders does, and that's something that Hillary will have to reckon with. She'll have to fine-tune her economic message and speak to the base at the moment that wants to hear a more fiery rhetoric out of their politicians. And you've seen Hillary try to fine-tune that message on the campaign trail in the recent weeks, going into the Senate battleground states. Of course, she sort of stumbled on that issue when she talked about, you know, businesses and whether they create jobs. But that's something that she'll have to really deal with come when she runs, because folks in her party want to hear her talk about that.
Let me go back to Liz. Is Hillary Clinton, where would you put her politically? I would say she's at least 2 notches to the right of Obama on foreign policy, security issues. She's much more hawkish than he is. I think I know that. On the domestic side, I think she's a notch or 2 to his right, if you go by the language the Clintons have used for years. People who work hard and play by the rules, making abortion safe, legal, and rare. Certainly the way they've sold themselves is moderates. I
think it's really important that people start distinguishing Bill Clinton from Hillary Clinton. When you actually go and you look at his political record versus her record in the Senate, there are actually some fairly major differences there. That's probably something that she's going to want to underline, actually, if she does run in the course of the primaries. But Bill Clinton, I think, is much more of a centrist than she is or has ever shown herself to be. But as far as the war record is concerned, yeah, you look at her Senate record, and she did have a pretty hawkish record. That being said, you know, somebody who's been pretty critical of President Obama's ability to basically go and start wars and continue wars pretty much all over the map. You know, she was his Secretary of State. At the end of the day, I'm not sure that there's as much daylight there as people want to pretend.
Yeah, but let's go back to your original question, and that is Ralph Nader. And, you know, Ralph Nader's not even in the ballpark. I mean, I guess he doesn't have General Motors to kick around anymore. And I like Ralph. When I see him, we speak, we talk, he likes to come up. But Ralph Nader, you know, is just, you know, he's saying things to get attention, because here we go, it's campaign season, and the reality is, he's right about this. I don't think she should be coronated. He's absolutely right, and I don't think she will be. But I also say this about Hillary Clinton, Chris, and I heard your show the other day, somebody made a baseball analogy about different kind of pitches, and I'm going to use a football analogy. She reminds me of the Denver quarterback, Peyton Manning. She calls those plays as she sees where she is, what the defense is doing, and she doesn't have a problem calling different plays depending on what audience, and that's what you're supposed to do this early in the campaign.
Boy, that sounds like Bill to me. That's Bill right there. When Cuomo was in the race, when Cuomo was in the race, he was off on the moderate side. The minute Cuomo pulled out, he went right into that position and forced Paul Tsongas over to that more moderate side. I saw his movement there. He moved his offense with the defense on the other side. Thank you. By the way, the roundtable's coming back with a real hot one. Up next, Democrats are raising the heat in the South, especially. They're trying to ignite a bigger African-American turnout come next Tuesday by waving the bloody shirts. That's an old phrase from the Civil War of Trayvon Martin and Ferguson. What happened out there? That's ahead. This is Hardball, the place for politics.